Great, thank you. Hello, this is David Lee from Prevent Connect, and welcome to today's Prevent Connect web conference, Coaching Boys into Men. This is part of a three-part series on program design, community engagement, and adaptation. Today is session 1, Coaching Boys into Men, an Introduction to Violence Prevention with Male Athletes. We are working closely with the Family Violence Prevention Fund in putting on this web conference. Prevent Connect is a national project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, sponsored by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views and information provided in this web conference do not necessarily represent the official views of the United States government, the CDC, or CalCASA. I'm glad to have so many people joining us, and I'm really pleased to be able to introduce our presenter from Futures Without Violence. We have Jasenia Gorbea. Did I say your last name correctly, Jasenia?
You got it, actually.
Great, and it's been a real pleasure to get a chance to be working with Jasenia, and welcome to joining us today.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you for the introduction. So why don't we just go ahead and jump right in. Many of you have seen these series objectives. So as you know, this is a three-part series. I broke it up with David into 3 different webinars because I figured that we wanted to cover all the folks who are new to Coaching Boys into Men, as well as all the folks that are really doing this work already and want to dive a little deeper. And it allows, the wide spectrum of those practitioners out there to gain the skills that they need. So starting today is our introduction to Coaching Boys into Men, and the full series will cover all of these objectives that you saw in the original promotional email. So as I said, today is going to be mostly an introduction. We're going to learn what Coaching Boys into Men is. I'm going to describe how Coaching Boys into Men works. What are the different elements of Coaching Boys into Men? What are the tools that are involved with the full Coaching Boys into Men ecosystem? We're then going to go into learning about the guiding principles of the program, and I'm going to be sure to break down all of the tools and resources that are made available to advocates when they're working with Coaching Boys into Men. And just so folks know what to expect in the other 2 sessions, these are the learning objectives that we'll be covering on June 1st and on June 15th. So on session 2, it's going to be broken into it's a 2-parter, session 2. The first part of session 2 is going to be focusing on how to organize and really do outreach in your community around Coaching Boys into Men. With the second part of that session, really focusing on the coaches clinic and how to train coaches and how to talk to coaches. The third session is going to be focusing solely on making adaptations to Coaching Boys into Men in order to meet community needs. So something that we've learned over time is that oftentimes programs that are, essentially determined to be evidence-based after rigorous randomized controlled trials, that a lot of folks can't replicate that model, generally speaking, because they don't have the same resources. Obviously, we're talking about different communities and different variables and people involved. So what does that mean when you're trying to make a program work as effectively as possible in your community? Oftentimes what we see is that folks will adapt the program. So we have done a lot of diving into that, and we will talk in depth around how to properly adapt Coaching Boys into Men so that you still see the same results as we have studied.
Yeah, Jasenia, I just want to add that for all of you who have registered for this conference, you will automatically be registered for the June 1st and the June 15th session, and we do encourage you to participate in all of those. If you have colleagues who were not able to make this session, they can join us. We will have a recording of this session available so people will be able to watch it and be prepared to join us on session 2.
Perfect, yes.
And yes, it is not June 15th, 2015. It is June 15th, 2016. Thank you, Jamil, for catching our typo.
I actually would love to go back in time and do it in 2015. So if you could develop that technology for us, David, that'd be great.
We'll work on it.
So for today, this is breaking down the agenda. So we're going to do some welcome and introductions, a few questions to get to know who's in the room. And then I'm going to go into the history of Coaching Boys into Men. So how did Coaching Boys into Men come to be before it was the CARD series and the curricula that it is? And then we're going to dive into the different elements, like I said, the resources. And I'll break down the results of the randomized controlled trial and what ultimately makes Coaching Boys into Men effective, although we won't go too deep into that because we'll cover the deep core elements or the key elements of Coaching Boys into Men in the third session, but we will do a really brief introduction to that. And then, again, we're just going to recap all the resources and tools at the end of the session. All right. So why don't we start with a question for the audience.
Great. So go ahead. So when I come in here, so if you can write in the text chat, why did you choose to attend this conference? I actually recognize many of the names of you, and some of you are actually very familiar with the program, and some of you aren't. But why are you coming to join this web conference? We want to get a sense from our audience of of why you're interested in joining us. So let's go ahead. Why did you choose? So what are some of your interests in why you're doing this? So this is not as much who you are, but why you are interested. So I see some people that are interested in implementing, are already implementing, hoping to institute at a local high school. Someone's implementing Green Dot but wants to look at other options, that they have the program, that they're raising 3 boy athletes, so want to think about the issue, want to implement. I see a lot of people have interest in implementing and having done it to find a better job of engaging with men. Great to learn more about this, to be interested in, and some people are engaging men grantees, I see, from the Department of Justice. Some people run men's groups and want to be able to do that. There are a lot of people looking to implement. So, Jasenia, I'm seeing a theme of a lot of, some people have been, they're interested, or they're already planning on implementing it. Someone's supervisor recommended they came because it would be good for their internship. And someone works with male fraternities and male athletes on a college campus. So I think there's a range of ages that we also see people working on, looking at doing this. While this is designed for a high school age, I know there's people that are both middle school and high school that and college that seem to be interested. So let's go to the next slide.
This is great.
If someone can advance the, great. And I'm sorry, and Ashley, if you can put the feedback on for ABCD. So just want to get at what role you play primarily. And we understand there's multiple roles. Are you primarily a DV or an SV advocate? Are you and put A for that? Are you primarily a coach? C, do you work in an in-school staff or educator, or D, other? And please, in the left-hand corner, Phil, not in the text chat, but go ahead and put that into the feedback question there. And Ashley, are people voting?
They are. People are voting, and I will share the results.
Wow, so half of our audience appears to be domestic violence, sexual assault advocates, and then another 15% are in-school staff or educators. We have very few coaches, and there's a lot of others. So if you're other, can you write down what the other is in the text chat? I'd love to know, because that's a third of our audience. I'd like to know who the others are, what role you play. If you're not a DV or sexual assault advocate, you're not a coach, you're not a staff. Oh, great, we've got evaluators and researchers and state health departments and health scientists and prevention educators, university student, prevention on campus, director of our Family Justice Center, a administrative level at DV who's supervising the program, prevention coordinator, transformational speaker in overcoming trauma, state coalitions, prevention coordinators, nonprofit So a lot of people who are doing other prevention education who might not be an advocate themselves. They might work in an organization that does advocacy, but they're really prevention people. Great, thank you for giving us. So, Jasenia, you have a pretty good feel of who our audience is.
Perfect, yeah, and I noticed that, we have some folks that are looking to implement. We have some folks that are already implementing, and they were putting in the chat box some of the challenges that they were seeing, and they were hoping to have those challenges addressed, which is exactly what we were hoping to do in this webinar series. Moving on to context matters. But before I jump in, what I will say is that, like I said, because this is an introduction to Coaching Boys into Men, a lot of the content that you'll see here, if you've already gone online and looked at the program, or even are already implementing but have had some challenges, a lot of this material in this webinar is going to be very familiar to you folks. And so for the folks that it's very familiar for, you might learn a few new things here and there, but if you're really new into the program, this will fill in a lot of blanks that you might not have gained or understood from just the website or reading the card series. So a little bit of history. Coaching Boys into Men started initially before it became Coaching Boys into Men, it actually began when Futures Without Violence, then the Family Violence Prevention Fund, we were trying to think of ways to begin to engage men in the conversation around ending violence against women. And in order to do that, we started by doing a number of focus groups and polls, national polls, to determine how we could engage men. And we've asked them a number of questions, but the majority of the questions that we asked came around to what they were willing or not willing to do about domestic violence and how they were affected by it. And not surprisingly, more than half the men have experienced either directly or indirectly or knew someone that had experienced domestic violence or sexual violence. And ultimately, they said that they didn't know how they were going to help, and others said that nobody had ever asked them to get involved, so they didn't really have the tools to do that. So when we asked them, what are the things that you probably would do if you wanted to get involved, the number one thing that stood out was that they were willing to and interested in talking to children about healthy relationships as opposed to talking to their peers. They felt less prepared and less comfortable talking to their peers. They felt very inclined to do the education to the next generation. And at that point in time, we weren't talking about coaching in the context of athletics. We had started to talk about coaching as a metaphor. So in other words, a coach of a young person that is a mentor or an educator in their lives. So we began with creating a public awareness campaign that appealed to that role model in men and to encourage them to take action and prevent violence. And in that process, we created a number of PSAs, we created a number of poster campaigns, and out of that, we then decided in 2007 that we wanted to redo that poll and see what effect it had made and what we could do moving forward. And what we found from that poll was that there was an increase in the number of men that were talking to young people about healthy relationships, about a 30% increase, which is fantastic. And what we saw was that more fathers were talking to their sons and daughters, and more than half of men believe that domestic or sexual violence will directly affect someone they know, so they were inclined to have this conversation. All of this was leading up to the creation of Coaching Boys into Men, which eventually, out of our key insights and the message that we were saying was we want to invite them into the conversation, not indict them. And in appealing to the role model in men, we recognized that there was a specific platform that we could probably use in order to spread these messages. And we chose sports as a platform because we realized that it enabled natural conversations between men and young men around a number of topics that were around violence prevention that could easily integrate violence prevention. So coaches were already talking to their athletes about character development and sportsmanship and being, good men and what it meant to be a role model on the field. And we felt that it was a really natural place to insert this conversation. And so at that time, we created the Coaching Boys into Men playbook. And if you're familiar with the playbook, what it does is that it breaks down the issue of violence against women. It provides them with a number of inspirational conversations with, at the time, back in 2007, some key sports figures that were endorsing Coaching Boys into Men and saying that these conversations needed to be had on the field and in the locker room and off the field. And what it does is that it walks coaches through that conversation, and then towards the end of the playbook, it gives about 5 different scenarios that coaches might see on and off the field with their young men, where they can essentially interrupt or talk to their young men with teachable moments around this issue. So at that point in time, we didn't have a set curricula as much as we had talking points and a conversation that we were encouraging coaches to have with young men. And since then, we decided that we wanted to go a little deeper because a lot of coaches were coming back to us and saying, well, we really love the teachable moments, but it doesn't cover the full plethora of the content that we want to talk about. And advocates were also saying this to us as well, is that they wanted to cover a number of topics. And coaches really wanted something that was, very straightforward, that guided them through the process of having these conversations rather than having ad hoc conversations off the field that involved more of an intimate discussion. They wanted a very structured environment. So we created the card series, which I'll talk about in a moment, but what we realized when we created Coaching Boys into Men, the playbook that evolved into the card series, we realized that the main lever here was that we were using the power of sports. And our guiding principles behind Coaching Boys into Men is leveraging the power of sports in terms of social influence, both in our greater society but also in schools, knowing that most young men in sports have a lot of social capital and tend to influence the social norms of a school. So we realized that not only can you make social norm change by, changing the conversations that those young men are having, but also that because sports are a platform that already has a system in place and it's a very, it's a pretty clear system across the country. Most schools have different ways that they function in terms of their athletic departments, but fundamentally you have the same sort of dynamic where the coach plays a mentorship role to the young athletes, and the young athletes tend to respect their coach and have a comfortable conversation and relationship with their coach. So we knew that already we had a place where we could insert these conversations pretty easily. We also know that in order to make this work, we needed to really partner with coaches, and we really needed to meet them where they were and bring them these conversations in a way that made sense to them and give them the talking points and the tools necessary to have these conversations, because it's not a natural thing to insert, even though it's a fairly seamless conversation starter because they're already talking about character development. It gets a little bit more complicated when you insert conversations around healthy relationships and around consent. And so the way to do that successfully, we have found, is to foster really strong partnerships between the DV organization or the DV SC advocate or the prevention educator in the community as well, and partner with the school as well as the coaches and really foster that community approach to intervening and preventing violence. We also know that Coaching Boys into Men, while initially we were trying to actually change the social norms among adult men, we realized that the way that we could do that is by having them educate young men. And what we're realizing is that, Coaching Boys into Men allows us to change the social norms of young people and change that behavior of young people, but it actually fundamentally started to shift the ways that the coaches were talking about it as well. So you're building leaders in two separate generations at the same time. And, of course, the coach, depending on the community, is a large influencer, not just in their athletes' lives, but generally in the community as well as the athletes. So we try to, pull all those levers and foster those partnerships and understand that in the culmination of all of these principles and these factors, you're going to have a much stronger implementation and you're going to have a much stronger community. So with that,
let's get a sense of how, and people have already given us a little hint in this, but let's get a sense of how familiar you are. So A, have you just learned about Coaching Boys into Men? B, have you seen the materials? C, have you actually delivered elements of it? Or D, you've done full implementation. So I want to just get a sense from our audience of how familiar you are, just so we can get a sense of who's in the audience. And I know I've seen a range, and if you put that in the left-hand column, that would be great in the chart as opposed to the text chart. That makes it a little easier because we can, and we're getting a live pie chart response. So, Jasenia, I see there's about a third of our audience who just learned about it and are here, 30%, 29, 30%, depending on how the voting goes, who are just learning about this. But we have an overwhelming 56% have or 58% have actually seen the materials and reviewed them, and then there's a 7% have delivered elements, and we have 4% who actually have done full implementation. So there's a lot of knowledge in this audience and a lot of familiarity with it in this audience.
Yeah, and I'm seeing actually on the right-hand column, there's Alan Heisterkamp and Laura Summers, some of our star Coaching Boys into Men champions that are implementing in Pittsburgh as well as Iowa. So I'm glad to see our community. I have to say, Coaching Boys into Men, it's a national community of implementers, and we have some of the folks that I've been working with very, very closely over the course of the last 2 years. We've created a Coaching Boys into Men advisory council for folks that have implemented, done a full implementation, and have like a full machine, essentially, running of Coaching Boys into Men, and I'm glad to have you guys here. So for those of you who are brand new to Coaching Boys into Men or have just reviewed the materials very briefly, let's talk a little bit about what Coaching Boys into Men is. And I'm going to define a few things because I think ultimately with Coaching Boys into Men, I'm so familiar with this content that I tend to throw around words here and there, and folks don't really know where they fit into that. So I really wanted to break it down. Well, the first thing is that when I use the term Coaching Boys into Men advocate, I tend to lump out our entire prevention community into that one bucket of advocate. And I say that because Coaching Boys into Men advocates are a wide variety of folks. They can be prevention educators at a local DV agency or at a health agency, or they can also be a DV, SV, traditional advocate. They can also be teachers. Sometimes we've seen Coaching Boys into Men advocates be the school nurse or the school counselor. And what I mean by that is any community leader or person who is working to bring Coaching Boys into Men into a local athletic program, whether that's in school or in a community setting. So I kind of bring everyone together because what I want folks to understand is that it'll be that key person who has that train the trainer content and who is trying to bring this prevention curricula to their community that is going to be partnering with the coach. So whatever role you play in your community, you'll fall into that category of Coaching Boys into Men advocate. And then a coach is a traditional coach. It's the adult or even a near peer that plays the role of a mentor with young people in an athletic context. And by near peer, I mean that in some implementations what we have seen is that it might not be the head coach, it might be the assistant coach who is more of a near peer. Or it'll be, for example, the captain of a team that has received Coaching Boys into Men year after year after year and has become a true leader in this content and is supervised by a coach or supervised by a CBIM advocate in their community, and then they're able to gain a lot of buy-in with their peers because they're their captain. And one of the things that's really critical to a successful Coaching Boys into Men implementation is the coach-advocate partnership, and I'm going to get into that a little bit more in just a second. And a few definitions in terms of the types of trainings that are available for Coaching Boys into Men. What you're attending today is the train the trainer, essentially training the advocates that will then go into the communities and train the coaches. So the train the trainer provides advocates with the tools that they need to talk to coaches, to understand the fundamentals of Coaching Boys into Men so that when they're in the community and they're seeing some challenges and they can meet them with some adaptations that are effective, those advocates feel prepared to do so. The coaches clinic is what we call the coaches training, which is essentially, the way that I kind of see it is that Futures or a really experienced Coaching Boys into Men advocate provides the train the trainer to a new advocate in a community, and then the advocate becomes the trainer in that community. It becomes kind of the center of Coaching Boys into Men. And the advocate then provides a coaches training to a number of coaches. So sometimes that can look like you found 2 champion coaches in the school, and you want to train them on Coaching Boys into Men, and they're going to deliver the content. Or sometimes that can look like the advocate will train an entire school's coaches or an entire district athletic directors. So we'll get into that in a second too. Also, there's 2 technical terms that I want to differentiate here. The larger piece of the pie, when I say implementation, what I mean is the full Monty. And the way that I'm going to try to describe it, and I'm testing out different metaphors here, so let me know if this works or not. But essentially, a full Coaching Boys into Men implementation is the full car. It has all of the running pieces. It has the motor, it has the wheels, it has all of the elements that you need in order to make a Coaching Boys into implementation effective. And what I mean by that is you have to have the coach-advocate partnership. You have to have the champion coach. You have to have all the right materials, and you have to have the right school environment that allows to reinforce the key messages of Coaching Boys into Men. Whereas delivery is specifically the coach giving the content to the young people. So when the coach is in front of the young athletes and is delivering the curricula, that is considered delivery, versus implementation is what the advocate and the coach do together. It's the full environment and ecosystem. All right, so getting a little deeper. Coaching Boys into Men is an evidence-based dating violence prevention program, and it promotes coaches and athlete leadership. And the things that Coaching Boys into Men focuses on is building positive bystander behavior and increasing the skills in the young athletes for developing healthy masculinity and respectful nonviolent relationships. All of the Coaching Boys into Men, when I say the ecosystem, it has all of the different elements. It's the coach's kit, the coach's training, the community buy-in, the coach-advocate partnership, ongoing community support, as well as evaluating your program. And the coach's kit is essentially, it could be a hard copy kit, which you can order from Futures, or you can download it for free online. The hard copy kit, we ask for a reimbursement on that because printing is a little bit costly, but the materials are completely available online for download and for printing if you're not able to purchase the hard copy kit. And like I said, we started with the playbook. We still have that integrated into the kit, as well as the full card series. The card series includes the curricula, which is 12 sessions, and 12 sessions are delivered by the coach over the course of 12 weeks with 15-minute discussions. And oftentimes, when coaches are delivering the content, they will do it in a variety of settings. They might do it in the locker room before training or before practice. They might do it on the bus on the way to an away game. So there's a lot of ways to integrate it into their regular schedule, and we'll talk more about how coaches do that in creative ways in the next session. As well, in the coaches kit, there are some other references and resources, and everything's available online at coachescorner.org. So here we're breaking it down a little bit more. The card series includes 5 prep cards, which help the coach essentially prepare for the season. It gives them some talking points. It helps them think about how they're going to talk through this with their athletes and with their community, and it helps them just really think about the curricula as a whole. The training cards are the actual content, and the content is broken down into lessons that they're going to be, the overarching lesson for that day, the objectives of that day. It gives them a starting talking point. It gives them 4 talking points that are the key content that they want to talk about. And then the end of that session or that training card will be 4 or 5 discussion questions that they can use in order to have a discussion with their athletes. Other resources that you'll find in the coach's kit, and if you've seen it before, is just an overview of what Coaching Boys into Men is, a getting started one-pager, a need help one-pager, which is really critical because, as we know, when you're talking about these issues, disclosures tend to come up, and we don't expect the coaches to play the role of a counselor or a social worker, but we do want to give them the resources that they need in order to make referrals to where they need to go in case of a disclosure. Of course, a lot of that is really critical to understand with the coach beforehand when you're doing the coaches clinic, and provide them with the resources that they need that are local to you and your community. So these resources are much more general resources in case the coach needs them, but mostly the resources for disclosures and for needing help is something that you'll want to talk through with the coach when you're starting to build that rapport and the coach-advocate partnership. We also have a few fun extra things in there, which is a sample sports reporter letter and a host a fan pledge day and a school radio script. A lot of that is for promoting coaching boys into men in their community. And we created it because many communities were starting to see that the folks wanted to talk about it and they wanted to feature it either in the local news or even the school paper, and we wanted to give them some promotional content that they could use and some scripts that they could use. The new content that we've built recently is we made Coaching Boys into Men inclusive of LGBTQ relationships. And then we integrated a one-pager around taking a stand against bullying, but specifically around homophobia and transphobia. So that's included in the Coach's Kit as well. There is the CBIM Works one-pager, which focuses on the randomized controlled trial and what works about coaching boys into men and what the results are. And then the two new pieces of content as well that you'll be learning about throughout this series is Are You a CBIM Coach?, which talks about the best coach characteristics for this program, and then Fair or Foul Play, which talks about different elements of coaching boys into men that might shift as you're making adaptations, and what are the things that are within bounds and what are the things that you might want to think about before you implement, because it might not lead to as an effective implementation.
Just sending up, before you go on to this next one, there's a couple questions we just want to get clarified from the audience. So one
Sure.
is just clarifying the cost of getting the Coach's Kit.
Oh, yes. So the Coach's Kit, what we do is that we print them en masse because we want to get as many as possible. And right now we don't have very many hard copy kits. But what we will do is we'll be printing by the end of this year another, I would say another load of Coach's Kit, about 1,000 kits. And what we do is that we request only the cost of that printing, and the cost is about $42 a kit. And what I generally recommend to folks is that the hard copy kit is reserved really for coaches that are going to be implementing. So you don't want to just have the hard copy kit handed out to a number of different stakeholders in the community, because really the person who's going to see the most benefit out of the kit is the coaches. You might want to have one kit that you keep internally as an organization, one or two that you use to promote or to talk about the content. But when you're doing a coach's training, for example, you'll want one kit per coach. You don't need a kit per athlete, for example.
Right. And if you want to download them, you can download all the materials for how much offline?
If you download them, it's totally free. And you can just print them at your own cost, or just read them online and see what works for you. But generally speaking, if you wanted to order the hard copy kits from Futures, it's about $42 for each kit.
And that will be available later on in the year. It's because right now it's not available, but it'll be available later on this year.
Yeah, the hard copy kits we just ran out, so it'll be available in a few months. But just keep tabs on it on the website, and in the meantime, feel free to download them off of the website.
Okay, and we want to encourage everyone to be able to do that, and that is free, that you can be able to get that. And the other question is, we'll talk about adaptation. There's several questions about adaptation for around college campuses, and there's questions about working with female athletes. And someone's asking, can they duplicate these kits from a local printer if they just get they download them offline?
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. The idea is to get this out there. So, and what's the website? It's Coach's Corner. I'll go ahead and post that into the. I will actually go ahead and post that right now. And you're actually going to be for session 2. We're going to ask all of you to review the Coach's Kit content before, but I'm putting that right into the coachescorner.org where we can do that. Evaluation, and I know evaluation is what you're going to talk about shortly, but is there also tools that you have available to help support people? Because, of course, we want people to evaluate what they're doing. Are there some tools that you also provide support for?
Yes, and I love that question because it means that people are already thinking about making sure that it's effective. We absolutely have those tools. I'm going to review them towards the end, if you don't mind. But we have the surveys and everything that you'll need in order to evaluate the program locally.
Okay, and someone was wanting to know, we'll give you the contact information they need to get written approval to print copies. So, but let's move on to the next piece there. I want to just get the questions that were in the audience because that's really great. And just to clarify, someone was saying, when is the trainer the train the trainer is done in person, but it also is done online right now.
Right, exactly. You can do the train the trainers through this webinar series, which we're going to then have recorded and turned into e-learning modules, or you can do an in-person training with this content. And what I would say in terms of adaptations, we're totally going to cover the aging up, aging town, the girls' adaptations in the third session. I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but we're definitely going to have that conversation.
Okay, great.
In terms of,
why don't you tell about what the different topics are?
Yeah, so the card series, just so folks know what we're covering, what you'll notice is that the card series, this is our 12 trainings that the coaches deliver, and the content gets more and more complicated as time goes on. So they start with a preseason speech, which basically sets the stage for the athletes to know what's going to happen this session or the season. And we start with things that coaches are already really familiar with, which is personal responsibility, and insulting language falls under sportsmanship. And then it starts to get a little bit more deep into the conversations around violence prevention, talking about disrespectful behavior towards women and girls, talking about digital disrespect and social media. And then by session 6, we're talking about, understanding consent and bragging about sexual reputation. And then we go into when aggression crosses the line, which also touches on some of the content that coaches are familiar with in terms of sportsmanship. But then we go back to talking about relationship abuse, boundaries, and communication. And towards the end, we wrap it up with talking about modeling respect, having healthy relationships. And the very last session is about signing the pledge. So essentially, young people are signing on to this whole program and saying that they are going to be leaders or not, and that they respect nonviolence, and that they will model this behavior in their school and in their team and in their everyday lives. And just so folks know, with coaches, and I'll talk a lot about this in the next session around partnering with coaches and where to provide the most support and what's critical in terms of supporting their coaches. The cards that tend to be most difficult for coaches to talk about, and folks will probably understandably so, are cards number 5, 6, and 7, which is digital disrespect, understanding consent, and bragging about sexual reputation. So those are the 3 most difficult pieces of content for coaches, and we'll talk about what it means to support them through that, but oftentimes we say, with advocates, that what you want to do is, especially with brand new coaches and very hesitant coaches, is provide them with the support that they need by perhaps you go in and you provide those trainings yourself as an advocate in partnership with the coach until they get comfortable with that content. So we'll talk more about that next session. So just so folks know, Coaching Boys into Men is in a lot of places. Now, I didn't include a map of the whole world because I don't have all the content or all the specific places around the world where Coaching Boys into Men is implemented, but it has been adapted for different countries. We do have very strong communities all across the nation, and a number of them have been lifted up as part of our Coaching Boys into Men Advisory Council. So if you see yourself on this list, then feel free to reach out to me and I'll connect you to the right person in that community. If you don't see yourself on this list in terms of the state or the city, still feel free to reach out to me and I might be able to find someone who has been interested in Coaching Boys into Men in your community and you can partner, because one of the things we're looking to do is make sure that if there are advocates from similar communities or even in the same state, that they're connected to one another so they can support each other in their implementation. All right. Now jumping into some more.
So before we ask this question, there's a question that I don't think we have in the slides. Just to clarify what age group this is designed for, we'll talk a lot about the adaptations on session 3, but just there's been a lot of questions of getting about who Coaching Boys into Men was designed for, and then we'll talk about how to be able to make adaptations. So that's before we ask this question.
I'm so glad you asked that. I can't believe I forgot the most critical piece. Coaching Boys into Men was originally designed for high school athletes, male athletes, so from 9th to 12th grade, we're looking at ages about 14 to 18, and it was designed primarily for in-school implementation. But we have seen it work and be just as effective in community implementations if it's used in a similar context with male athletes within the high school range.
Okay, great. I'm trying to get to all the questions that people are asking. So let's ask a question of our audience. You've been hearing about this. So, and we'll be talking about the results, but I just want to get a sense from what you have seen so far. What do you think of the elements that you see? What do you suspect is what make coaching boys and men effective? What do you think would be able to do? What are the elements of that? And so Leslie talks about mentor relationships with athletes and engaging men as allies and reaching boys with positive relationships and respect lessons. Because it's relatable role models to promote healthy behaviors. It gives coaches language consistent with prevention specialists and advocates in the field. It looks at men as influencers as young men. A lot around role models and mentoring we're seeing. Men engaging men around masculinity, allowing for a conversation that would not be possible. And so I see just a lot of role modeling and mentoring in our conversation. I have to say, thanks to Rhonda for talking about the socio-ecological influences that we're looking in different ways within an established infrastructure. And that there's saturation, being able to cover this in multiple ways. So, Jacinia, I'm seeing a lot of different pieces, the dosage. Alexandra talks about the multiple sessions. It's not a one-time conversation, but a continuing conversation. And thanks to Melissa for using dosage as public health types like that to be able to do that. And that there's a lot about the relationship to coaches and non-threatening forum, and a lot about mentoring and role models seem to be the themes that I'm seeing emerge, Jacinia, from our comments.
That's perfect, and that's exactly right. What we'll talk about, and I'm going to move on to the next section, which is what makes coaching boys into men effective, is that what we have done, and I'm going to actually skip to something really quickly and then come back to the randomized controlled trial, is that we recognized that after we did the randomized controlled trial that we needed to determine what made coaching boys into men effective. And that we needed to be able to communicate that to the community so that when they were making adaptations to the program or when they were implementing in general, that they knew what are the elements that they could shift and what are the elements that really needed to stay the same in order to get the same sort of effects that they're looking for. And what we realized from that is that there are key messages as well as specific, we broke it down into 3 categories, which is key messages, delivery methods, as well as implementer characteristics. And the project that brought us here was the project that we engaged with in partnership with the CDC Foundation, as well as our chief evaluator, Elizabeth Miller, out of the University of Pittsburgh. We talked about what are the real-world implementations that we're seeing, and we did an adaptation study out of the University of Pittsburgh where we saw an advocate implement the Coaching Boys into Men curricula as opposed to a coach in partnership with a coach, but the advocate was doing the majority of the implementation. And what we noticed was that it had the same effect as a coach implementing it because it was still within that context of a mentorship role. It was still had that dosage, which is what we talk about, which is that it's over time, and it was, it covered the topics. And a lot of people say, and you're going to get this a lot with Coaching Boys into Men, especially coaches who are new to the program, they'll say the content is so repetitive, and that's actually really critical to Coaching Boys into Men because especially in education, it's important to cover these things over and over in order to really get that full saturation. And so we're going to talk about what the core elements are of Coaching Boys into Men, and that was part of the project goals that we were trying to figure out was what are these core elements? How can we communicate them to the field so that when they're taking Coaching Boys into Men and looking to implement it, they can shift it to meet their needs? And then what are some tools that we can create to support that? So even after we have really narrowed down what these core elements are, how are we going to then make sure that the field understands that and that coaches understand that in a way that is tangible to them, that makes sense and it speaks their language essentially. So to go back, Coaching Boys into Men was evaluated, I believe back in 2009. I don't even see the year there, but yes, it was evaluated in 2012, I think it was actually. Do you remember, David?
I have to go look up the studies, which I will, and I am doing as we speak.
I know that Leah and Meredith are probably on there, so if you guys remember. But in any case, it was either 2009 or 2012. We did a 3-year evaluation of 16 high schools in Sacramento, and it was funded by the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and it was a 2-armed cluster randomized control trial run by Dr. Elizabeth Miller, at the time was at UC Davis, with 16 high schools in Sacramento, with 8 of them randomized, and by that we mean that 8 of them received Coaching Boys into Men and 8 of them did not. And the coaches and athletes were surveyed at baseline. They were surveyed 3 months after the intervention, and then they were surveyed again 12 months after the intervention, so a full year after. And we did only a 60-minute training session with the coaches after completing the baseline, and then we did a 1-year follow-up survey. So the 60-minute training session is essentially the coaches clinic that we've created for you guys.
And Senia, just so you were correct on both your dates. The study began in 2009 and was publications came out around 2012, in 2012, 2013, 2014.
I knew I had those dates right somehow. I just wasn't sure. Thank you so much, David. So the results that we found was that at 3 months, the young people that received Coaching Boys into Men were more likely to report intentions to intervene, in other words, positive bystander behavior, and that they were more likely to intervene than those not in the program. So there was a statistical significance there. And then 1 year later, we were pretty excited to find that although we did not reduce essentially the perpetration of intimate partner violence or sexual violence, what we saw was that they reported less perpetration and less negative bystander behavior, essentially preventing future negative bystander behavior and future perpetration of intimate partner violence or sexual violence. So it was proven to positively affect male athletes' bystander behaviors and reduce abuse perpetration among athletes who received the program. And we were really excited to find that because, you know, it's part of the work that we do to make sure that we're measuring the effectiveness of our content and of our curricula. So as I said, this is a project that we undertook more recently, and that was in partnership with Dr. Elizabeth Miller and her team out of Pittsburgh, well, she's now in Pittsburgh, in order to determine the core elements of Coaching Boys into Men. And what we have found is that effective implementation is broken down into 3 things. Again, the key messages, which we're going to cover in the last session, the implementer characteristics, which we're going to cover next session, and delivery, which we're going to cover throughout the second and third session. So we're going to talk about all of these essential elements throughout the next 2 sessions. And another thing that's really critical to make sure that you have a sustainable implementation. So I want to differentiate between effective implementation, which is that you get the results that you're looking for within that 1 season, and a sustainable implementation. An effective implementation requires these core elements, but a sustainable implementation requires community buy-in, coach-advocate partnership, and a pilot to full-scale implementation model. And by that I mean that you start with a small group of folks and you slowly grow your implementation over time so that you can continue to build that community buy-in, continue to build your rapport and the coach-advocate partnership, and also so that you can start to build champions that can support your work throughout the scaling up. Because one thing to remember is that if you have maybe one prevention educator in your community and you're a small rural town, or even if you're a large urban center, is that you can't rely on just the advocate to provide this sort of support year after year. What you want to do is build really strong champions within the community. So the way to do that is to go from a small pilot to slowly a full-scale implementation. And after doing this project for the last 2 years with the CDC Foundation, we created a number of tools. We're going to talk about all of these tools over the course of the next two sessions. We created stuff for advocates. We created tools for advocates to walk them through the organizing journey of Coaching Boys into Men. So what does it look like day one after you take this, train the trainer? What's the first thing that you do, and what are the steps that you're going to see afterwards? We created a number of tools for coaches. So, Are You a CBIM Coach covers the core characteristics that we're looking for in coaches, and the fair or foul play document that you see there talks about what they should stay within bounds in terms of adaptation, and what are the things that are going to reduce the effectiveness if they continue to implement it in that way. And then we also created adaptation guidelines for advocates looking to adapt to the program in their communities. And of course, we're going to cover all of that in the third session. I wanted to give folks a sense of the full ecosystem of Coaching Boys into Men. We didn't until recently have an advocate toolkit. We first started, like I said, with the Coaching Boys into Men playbook. We expanded and we created the card series. The card series is the curricula that was studied. But then we recently, in doing this new project around the core, identifying the essential elements and identifying what makes Coaching Boys into Men effective in communities, we created an advocate toolkit, because what we realized is that in order to make sure that you have an effective implementation and a sustainable implementation, it's the advocates that go into that community that are going to build that over time, and are going to make sure that the coaches are reinforcing the right messages, and are going to make sure that that community is bought into the program and is able to sustain it over time. So these are the tools that we provide advocates, which is beginning with the guiding principles, which we saw a little earlier, and then the organizing journey, as well as the community readiness assessment, which is a long infographic that walks advocates through the process of assessing whether or not a community is ready to take on Coaching Boys into Men, as well as we have a tip sheet, an organizing tip sheet. We have the adaptation guidelines, and then we also have the progress report, which we have you send to futures at the end of each season once you're in the process, once you've actually started implementation, so that we can provide you with technical assistance as we go along, and so we can connect you to other folks that are doing this work. Some other really interesting tools, which are not going to be necessarily covered here, but will be available on our website, are promotional tools that help advocates when they're trying to promote Coaching Boys into Men in their communities, which includes videos as well as posters and brochures. And then we also have frequently asked questions for making the case. And by that I mean when you're going into a new community and you're establishing those relationships with the school or with a community-based organization or a local athletic program, they're going to have a number of questions. And we have seen these questions time and time again, and we have a frequently asked question tool for you so that you can address those as they come along. We also have a Spotlight Toolkit, and that Spotlight Toolkit, although it's not available yet online, we'll make it available by the end of the summer, because we're redoing the Coaching Boys into Men website, and the website will have all of these tools aggregated in a resource library. The Spotlight includes 5 reasons for engaging men, which is a really good tool for making the case. We also have a number of news articles that have been featured in both local context as well as national context around Coaching Boys into Men. Sometimes that helps when you're making the case, because people will see that there's a lot of coverage around this program. Another tool that we have in the Spotlight kit is it depends on whether or not you're reaching out to the media. Some communities that have large implementations, they're reaching out to the media and talking to reporters and having folks cover their Coaching Boys into Men implementation. We also have some tools in there for them.
Okay, and just to clarify, what is available now on the website? You talk about this, and how do you find this? And yes, this is being recorded, and it will be archived. So we will have this available for people. Where is there's a lot of people asking where to get this Advocates Toolkit, and I know you haven't even finished it.
We're in the process of finishing it, so it will be available to the field on the website by the end of June, and then the website will be redone by the end of July so that you can go in there and easily access everything, the full Monty. The Advocate Toolkit will be available by the end of this series, essentially.
Great. And we will send, and we will inform everyone who is registered for this web conference when that's available and the URLs for those as they are available.
Exactly. And then the promotional tools that you see there, the videos, the posters, the brochures, and making the case are already available on the website. But the Spotlight Toolkit is not, but what we can do is I can make it available at the same time as the Advocate Toolkit.
Great. Thank you very much.
So I'll be sure that all of this is available by the end of this series so people can access them and download those tools as they see fit. What's already on the website is the evaluation tools. So for folks, like you said earlier, David, for folks who are already implementing or looking to start their implementation from the ground up and are already thinking about evaluating, we have created, in partnership with Dr. Miller and her team, they created evaluation tools. So surveys, preseason surveys, postseason surveys for coaches and athletes, as well as they created the tool to analyze those surveys, and we even held a program evaluation webinar that walked people through the process of using all of those tools. So what are the best practices for delivering those surveys, and what are the best practices for analyzing those surveys, and even how can you run, so to speak, a report on those surveys. So that webinar was conducted last year with one of Dr. Miller's key researchers, Katrina. She and I did an evaluation webinar, and it walks you through the entire process of evaluating an implementation.
And I am looking on the website now. I would post shortly where that you can find that on their website.
Yes. I believe it's in, when you're going to Coach's Corner, it's under Community.
I will find it soon.
Okie dokie. And then other tools that are available, obviously, are the Coaches Clinic tools. These are also available on the website. And a lot of these are available via a Dropbox link on the website, but I can also download the content onto the actual website. But we have the actual clinic presentation, so essentially the presentation you're going to use with coaches. We also have a clinic lesson plan, which I'm going to walk everyone through in the next session. We have a season planning worksheet for coaches. So oftentimes in the clinic, you're going to want to sit down throughout the clinic and throughout that training and have coaches plan out when they're going to be delivering and when they're going to be doing the evaluation. And you want to make sure that they are communicating to you when's the best time and what are the best ways to communicate with you as the advocate. And that worksheet breaks it all down for you. We consider it kind of your coach intake form so that you know all the information about the implementation going in. And then we have our frequently asked questions, basically a worksheet that talks about all of the questions that will generally come up during coaches' clinics and responses that we use during those clinics. And the clinic presentation, it's in a PowerPoint form, and what you'll notice, and I'll show this to you in the next session, it's not just the presentation. It has a number of notes and talking points incorporated into the presentation so that you can just study the presentation and very easily bring it to your community. And many of you, because you're violence prevention advocates or your violence prevention educators or DVSC educators, a lot of this content is very familiar to you. It's just a matter of using the language that's familiar to coaches, and that's all integrated into the Coaches Clinic tools so that you can really immerse yourself in that language and understand how to bring it to them in a way that makes sense to them. And then there is just the general agreements with futures, which is we like to have as much feedback from folks from the community, so we request progress reports from folks on a seasonal basis. So we send out a progress report to folks at the end of the fall season and then at the end of the winter season and at the end of the spring season, so we can know how many people are implementing at one time, what are the challenges that they're seeing, what are some tools that they're needing, so that we can continue to enhance the program as we move through it as time goes on. And then, of course, there's the licensing agreement, and by that, it's mostly that folks are agreeing to use the content in the way that it was intended, and that if they're going to adapt the content, that they're going to reach out to futures and talk to us about it. But it also is mainly so that we know who out there is using the content so that we can continue to do follow-up with them, actually. All right, and this is part of the content that we're going to be talking about in session 3, which is that we've seen a lot of adaptations out there, which is great. I'm very glad that people have seen the value of coaching boys into men and that it is spreading like nonviolent wildfire. And what that means is that people are trying to make it fit and make it work for different communities. We have an international playbook that we created in partnership with UNICEF a few years ago. An international playbook is translated into multiple languages, also available on the website through the Coaching Boys into Men store. It was translated into Spanish, Portuguese, and French. And if at any time you want to order the hard copy version of that, you can order it through the store. We've also seen adaptations for girls' sports, which we're going to talk about, aging up and aging down, and by that I mean aging it down to middle school, aging it up to college, and even sometimes the professional leagues. And then we've also seen folks take it, because originally it was intended for high school settings, putting it in different community settings. That can look like anything from a sports league at a YMCA to a camp, which I've been talking to a number of our folks that have actually been integrating Coaching Boys into Men into a camp setting. I'm also working with Casa de Esperanza to translate Coaching Boys into Men and make it relevant for Spanish and monolingual Spanish and Latina communities. And that will hopefully be made available by the end of this year. And although it's not on this list, we're recently looking to partner with the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center to make these resources, or make Coaching Boys into Men culturally relevant for Native communities. And we've already seen French-Canadian communities adapt it and Jewish communities adapt it for their specific needs. And it's always, ever-changing, and oftentimes folks reach out to us directly to support those adaptations, and we're more than happy to do that. So just know that it's a very flexible program. We just need to be able to make sure that we're hitting all of those key elements, and that we're structuring it in such a way so that what you're essentially implementing will be effective.
Okay, and someone was asking if these are available. Some of them are available, a lot of them are in development. We will be talking much more about the process of adaptation, and I think this is what I think is going to be, I'm very excited about this, and following up on some of the work from the partners from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention who are actually on the web conference, I see. And so we'll be talking about those. I did just put the link for the international one that is available now, and so others are being in development, and so you'll be getting information from that. And I see someone's already saying, can I connect with other people who are doing this in higher ed? So there's some
Absolutely.
networking going on, which is great, and that's also something that you can contact Jasenia offline to be able to do. So let's move on to the next slide and ask a question of our audience.
Sure.
So I see a lot of interest and questions about this. So what tools have you, from your experience, or do you anticipate are going to be really helpful in supporting coaches and being able to do the work? So I want to see what tool resonates with you as something you have found or you anticipate is going to be very helpful in the work you're doing. And that's why we're doing a 3-part series. We wanted to go into greater depth as we're calling this we call it our peer learning forum, so we can go into much greater depth to be able to explore these questions. Today was the introductory pieces. So what tools do you think are going to be particularly important and helpful that you're looking for in being able to do this work? I see it's a little harder question to answer than what we've had. So, I mean, there's definitely the interest, and I've been putting pieces in there around the evaluation tools. That's something that people are looking for, and coaches and conversation guides for coaches. There's a concern around getting the buy-in and how to get the buy-in, and that's an important piece, and that's a really important. I'm really glad that you brought that up.
That's right.
And then the results of the study, the card series frames the topics well. Alan points out the relationship spectrum from the love is respect they share with. So we'll use different resources in addition to this, relating with coaches, the athletic language and being able to do that in the language Community readiness assessment and guides, something that's a really good point. Sports-focused articles are related to the topic of how sports talks about this. Coaches love the card series. Looking forward to hearing about adaptations. Role play. The coaches love this. So great. So we're working on getting some of the interest in the pledge, pointing out, and the talking points, and particularly Lucy's appreciating the LGBTQ and the transphobia pieces and being able to. That's what an important opportunity to be able to address this work. So great. So Jasenia, we're seeing a lot of interest in where we're going. There's questions, I think, more about practical things that we might not. We have a little bit of time, so we'll be able to do questions.
Perfect.
And and I love how Casey says, I love chunking 1 to 12 small digestible nuggets. That's not overwhelming. So let's move to the next slide, and we'll get to a piece here. So do you want to talk a little bit about a very short video that we're going to show?
Yes. So as a part of our project with the CDC Foundation, when we were trying to create different tools to communicate the essential elements of coaching boys into men, we realized that we needed to use a different number of mediums. So not just handouts, but also incorporating reinforcing those core and essential elements throughout the card series, in the one-pagers, as well as reinforcing it in the training and enhancing our training process, which is why we've ended up with an enhanced train-the-trainer process. But the most interesting thing is that we knew that we needed to create videos that would communicate this. So we created 2 videos that portray or kind of capture all of the essential elements of coaching boys into men. And we have essential elements that we want advocates to focus on, and then we have essential elements that we want coaches to focus on. The video that we're going to watch today is what we call a training video for advocates that reinforces what we want you guys to come away with in terms of the essential elements that advocates play a key role in. So whenever you're ready, you can roll that video.
I just want to warn people that the sound is going to come through your computer if you're on the phone. So we will. Ashley is going to run the video, and you might have to press play on your screen. It will look like a YouTube video. Okay.
Fantastic.
I think I know some people were having a little bit of challenge with the. But it did look like it worked for most of you, so I want to appreciate that. We are getting to a few minutes left, and I know we want to get a few questions. Can we move to the next slide, please?
Yes. All right.
So now it is the time for questions and answers. So if we missed a question that you had, this is a chance to be able to do this and get to us. I'm going to start with Jasenia. There's the 12 session. There's the 12 topics versus sessions, actually. It's an interesting conversation to have. And to talk about is this something you do once? Is it something you bolster? And how do you deliver that? So that was one of the questions that came up.
So I think in terms of effectiveness, it's 12 sessions. Again, it's 15 minutes per session. You don't want to do more than 2 sessions a week, and I'm gonna reinforce all of this in the adaptation section or the last session, because there's a question of, like, I think one of our participants already mentioned, dosage, which is that you want to make sure that the athletes are getting these messages more than once and that it is spread out over time rather than all in one go, which tends to be less effective over time. So it can be anywhere to a 15 to 20-minute conversation each time. Coaches will do it at the beginning of practice. Again, best practice is usually before practice, because if you've had a really rough practice or even a really tough week at the end of the week, athletes are less likely to listen to the material. So you want to have it somewhere in the middle of the week, at the beginning, and catch the athletes when they really have a lot of energy and attention to give you. Was that answering the question, David?
That's great. And then I think there's a lot of pieces about Alan had put in, I think think of it as a steady drip of prevention. And I think that you had mentioned earlier that there's a repetitive nature to this because it's about reinforcing the message. And so there is a piece, and I think really some of the successes is about the coaching relationship, and that these messages become just in the lessons, but get embedded in the relationship with the coaches to their athletes, and then among the athletes with each other. And so it's about embedding these messages throughout, as opposed. So think of the 12 pieces as sort of the frame to this, but that we want to be able to see it go much further. Is that a good way to describe it, Jasenia?
Absolutely. And for, I love that Alan, who was featured in the video, is the one that said the steady drip of prevention. So thank you so much for that, Alan. You always have such great insights into this, because Alan has been implementing coaching voices to men for maybe the last 11 to 12 years. So generally speaking, he's the person I go to when I have a question. But the way to think about it is, with school and any form of education, you go to school and you practice arithmetic over and over and over until you understand it. You practice your multiplication tables over and over and over until you understand it. It's the same thing with prevention. It's not just a one and go, and it can't just be in one lump sum. It has to be over time, it has to be steady, and it has to be repetitive. Despite the fact that a lot of people don't like that it's repetitive, you have to come back to the same topics. And generally speaking, when you come back to the same topics, you're going to go back in much more depth, but you're still covering the same conversation. So you might have a much more introductory conversation around consent with a middle schooler. And by introductory, I mean you're covering the basics of consent. And then in high school, consent is going to be a very different conversation. You're going to go much more deep into the conversation. And the conversations have to evolve naturally over time, but you're still having the same conversation, or you're talking about the same topic.
Yeah. There's a question about the role of veteran students and students who've gone through this in multiple years. And you talked about in some settings that those, perhaps the captains or those who've gone through it, then become ones that are actually delivering, at least reinforcing, but maybe even delivering the lessons.
Yeah, that's right. And in some settings, it's actually preferable for the captains or youth leaders who have undergone the program multiple times to then deliver the messages, because you're going to find that the athletes, one of the most effective parts of coaching boys into men is that it comes out of a natural mentorship relationship with a coach. And you're going to have that same sort of near peer mentorship relationship when you're talking about a senior who's a captain on the team and a freshman who is brand new to the team. They're going to look up to that senior captain as much as they look up to the coach. And they might listen to them more, and they might be even more inclined to go up to that young person. And that's why it's really important that it's an advocate-coach partnership, because the coach, when they're allowing or when they're making space for the young people to be the deliverer of some of the messages, that young captain and that young person needs to be supported by the coach in the same way that the advocate needs to support the coach when they're first implementing as well. So it's a system of building rapport and building community around these conversations, so that it's not just one person delivering these messages, but that in fact you're building leaders and champions across the community that will continue to reinforce that message no matter where they go.
Okay. There is a question, and this is actually a broader question of some of the management, is that there are going to be athletes and students who are not going to be interested in this and doing it, and so I think one of the how does your program help prepare coaches to deal with students who are rebellious or don't want to learn anything or resistant to it?
I think that's something that comes up often, and I think it comes up in a variety of forms. It's either students are hesitant to have these conversations, or the coaches are hesitant to these conversations. And we actually have a number of tips and tricks, and by that I mean we've collected information from implementations from over the years of ways of different best practices that work in different sorts of communities. And of course, we're always willing to learn, but I will definitely go more deeply into that conversation of how to meet community resistance or hesitation or whatever challenges you may see in terms of bringing having that conversation. I'm going to go into that in the next session around gaining buy-in. But with students, generally speaking, when they're working with coaches, they generally listen to their coaches, and some of the coaches take more of a, this is something that's a part of your responsibilities as an athlete. They decide that if you want to be on this team, you have to listen and you have to be a part of these conversations. And over time, they build that rapport with athletes so that athletes get more bought into the program. But, anecdotally, we haven't studied this, but anecdotally we have found that most teams that start these conversations or start having these conversations, it actually builds team morale, and it actually builds the relationship and strengthens the relationship between the coaches and the athletes. So whatever resistance or hesitation that coaches generally meet at the beginning of the season, it tends to ebb over time and evolve into more of a discussion and even, a good relationship about these things.
And as in the conversation going on, pointing out that it's important, and that's, I think, the advantage of working with advocates, particularly from sexual violence or domestic violence organizations, is that we need to be trauma-informed, and that some people, though, that resistance might be a reflection of some of their personal experiences, and we want to find a way to be able to be supportive. And
that's absolutely right.
In being able to move well, and that's what we'll be talking about a little bit in the subsequent sessions. And also, as you had pointed out, and someone had raised there, that player and student buy-in is what it makes a team successful for sports performance. So coaches are really aligned and interested in being able to see the optimization. And in Sacramento, I had the advantage of being on the advisory committee for that study and seeing some of the coaches and athletes speaking about the program and how powerful it really made them a stronger team, and they kept on discussing that. I am aware that our time is coming to an end, and I want to be able to highlight this. This is the beginning of the conversation. We'll be continuing. Let's move to the next. Can you pass the podium to me, please? Great. So thank you, Jasenia, so much. This is great. Well, our next session is going to be on June 1st. We'll be talking more about the role of the advocate in the organizing process and promising practices for community outreach, review the coaches' training materials, and talk about holding a coaches' clinic and answering more questions. To prepare for next session, we are giving, I hate to call it homework, we'll just call it preparation, to review the materials of the coaches kit. And we have the URL on the screen, and so we want to really encourage you to be able to do that. And that'll be our next session will be on June 1st. We will send you email reminders. And the third session will be on June 15th. I will not be able to join you for that session, but Ashley and Jasenia will be at that session. And so we'll be able to be moving forward there. So we look forward to having you see there. Also, there's an evaluation. Do fill out the evaluation. It's really important for us because it gives us a sense of how to improve during the session, and we will review those so we can be able to address your concerns and make sure that we're best meeting the needs of all of you. So this is a dynamic process and need your input. You'll get that in about 15 minutes. If you want to be able to get information, Coach's Corner, you can always send emails to Coach's Corner at Futures Without Violence. You can contact Jasenia directly, and you see her email there. I saw people are asking who else in England is doing this or who else is doing this in college campuses, so you can be able to connect, and Jasenia is really committed to her work as a networker, so I want to really thank you, all of you. I love the comment here. Thank you. This was great. I knew a lot about, I'm familiar with the program, and I learned things today. So I want to thank all of you for this. I want to especially thank Jasenia for all of the work, and thank Ashley for a lot of the work behind the scenes, and thank most importantly, our audience who makes the world of difference. We look forward to seeing you on future Prevent Connect web conferences in the next session of this. So thank you so much. This was a wonderful session. We will talk with you all in 2 weeks on June 1st, and if you have colleagues who want to join it, make sure they watch the recording beforehand and do your preparation. Thanks so much. This concludes today's Prevent Connect web conference.